Liquidity management (LM) and interest rate risk (IRR) management are fundamental components of asset liability management (ALM). The recent fluctuations in interest rates and money market rates have increased the need for liquidity and IRR management. A thorough understanding of the skills required to manage these risks is crucial for the profitability and sustainability of any organization. In this unit, you will learn about concept of liquidity management, sources of liquidity risk, liquidity risk measurement and mitigation, concept of interest rate risk, IRR management, sources of IRR, IRR measurement and mitigation.
Banks need liquidity to manage their cash flows. If there is a big outflow of funds in one particular account causing the cash levels to drop, there should be another source of immediate cash inflow. This cash could come from sources of income, interest from bonds or fees, or from sale of certain assets, bonds, and equities. However, the sale of assets is not always optimal, as there usually is a transaction cost for any sale of asset, and sometimes it involves booking losses at the wrong time. The sale of securities that are not easily marketable will also lead to some losses because of transaction costs or other charges. On the other hand, a bank cannot keep all its assets in the form of liquid securities, as there will not be enough income earned in terms of interest. Liquidity management involves managing this trade-off in the best possible way. It comprises activities within a bank's balance sheet and off the balance sheet. Liquidity management involves analyzing funding requirements, funding sources, current liquidity position, market liquidity of assets, present and future plan of assets, as well as income and capital. Good liquidity management helps a bank increase profitability and reduce the risk of incurring extreme losses due to illiquidity. The bank can also meet its commitments, legal and relationship, without delays. This improves the reputation of the bank in the market. Click the button to learn more. Liquidity risk comes from uncertainty in a liquidity position. Measurement and management of liquidity is a very important aspect of ALM. Liquidity risk can come from various sources. Click each button to learn more. Liquidity risk is usually measured using the concept of stock approach of liquidity or the flow approach of liquidity. Click each button to learn more. Liquidity risk mitigation can be done in the following ways. Diversifying sources of funding. Managing the cash flows across a maturity ladder so that there is no huge cash outflow or inflow in one particular bucket. Investing in more liquid instruments that can be sold in the market easily in crisis scenarios. Building prediction models for cash outflow or inflow and managing it better. Using repo and money market effectively for short-term needs. Improving predictability of profits, thus being able to get easy funding. While liquidity risk looks into cash flow servicing in the short term, interest rate risk is more focused on long-term cash flows and how they can be managed better to reduce probability of losses in the future. Every bank enters into a long-term contractual obligation on its liability side and on its asset side. Managing the gap between the cash flows arising out of these two sides forms a part of interest rate risk, IRR management. IRR affects the profit and loss value of a bank. A few situations in which the effect can be observed are as follows. Click The various sources of IRR are as follows. There could be other forms of risk sources, but they would mostly be covered in one of the categories detailed below. Click each button to learn more. There are a few ways in which the IRR can be measured. Click each tab to learn more. IRR mitigation is essential in case of ALM in a bank's balance sheet, wherein the assets and liabilities are sensitive to interest rate fluctuations. IRR mitigation ensures that the fluctuations arising from the interest rates affect the assets and liabilities of the bank's balance sheet in more or less the same way. This in turn ensures that the gap between the assets and liabilities remain bridged, which is essential for ALM. IRR can be mitigated in the following ways. Click each button to learn more. As you study the subject, it will help to pause and check your understanding. Here is an exercise that will help. Read the instructions on screen to complete this exercise. Read the instructions on screen to complete this exercise. Read the instructions on screen to complete this exercise. Read the instructions on screen to complete this exercise. In this unit, you have learnt the following. Liquidity risk and interest rate risks are essentially two sides of the same coin. With interest rate risk, the prices of bonds or investments decrease with increase in yields. This decreases the value of assets to match liabilities, which ultimately affects the asset-liability mismatch and hence the NII. Liquidity management involves activities within the bank's balance sheet and off the balance sheet. The stock approach involves several ratios that can be used to measure and manage liquidity. The flow approach checks the liquidity gaps of various cash flows and measures risk sources. Every bank enters into a long-term contractual obligation on its liability side and on its asset side. To manage the gap between the cash flows arising from this forms part of the interest rate risk, IRR management. Gap risk, basis risk, curve risk, and option risk are some of the main sources of IRR. You have now come to the end of this unit. Answer these questions to see how much you know about the concepts you have covered in this unit. Go through the unit again in case you have doubts.